Let me start a book presentation with bookends. So we wanted a bookend at the beginning and a bookend at the end, some quotations. The first quotation is, I'm not going to give it directly, but the first reference that I found in written literature on Ukrainian territory economy is from the Strabo, the Greek geographer of about 7 AD, in which he talks about how the Pontus Euxinos, the Black Sea, was pacified by Greek colonies on the northern shore. And then he goes on to say why they were there. They were there to trade, guess what? Grains, honey, wax, the first constant of Ukrainian history, economic history. Breadbasket of Greece and Europe way back then to the present day and for the future. Second constant of Ukrainian political economic history begins a little bit later, constant struggles among different members of the elite to control these rich resources. And that goes to the present day. And the third constant, and that is the one that is most positive and most hopeful, the absolutely incredible, historically stubborn insistence on the part of Ukrainian peoples to say that we are different. We are Ukrainians, we are not something else. And that goes to the present day. And I try to weave these three things through my book, which just covers the independence period. Now, the central syllogism of this book, as you have in front of you on the first page, consists of following points. First, A, what happened?
Got in the way. Your glasses. Remove your glasses. This got in the way. Okay, you got it.
Okay. Is it coming through now? Yes. What happened? Well, two main things happened. On the positive side, living standards are much better than in Soviet times. Now, that's a controversial finding because everybody says GDP is lower than it used to be. It's just simply wrong, and I won't spend a lot of time. You can read the book as to why I think that's the case. But there's a big negative. Ukraine lags far behind its former peers of the post-communist world, Central Europe. And the first quantitative piece is the bottom chart on the back page of GDP per capita. And you can see the comparison between, let's say, Ukraine and Poland started out at the same point in 1990 in per capita income. By 2012, 2013, it was 3 times higher at least. In fact, this was a rallying cry of a lot of the young people who were aware enough of this falling behind that the Ukrainian economy was really performing much worse than the, for example, Polish and other Central European economies. Why? Because something is wrong, is basically why they thought. Well, point B in the syllogism of my book is to ask the question, why the lag? Well, first of all, what I start with, I refer to as the proximate cause. And the proximate cause was this lagging behind in economic reforms. And if you want to do quantitative stuff, take a look at the top half. And in the top half chart on the back page here, the left side is all of the countries of Central Europe and the Baltics. The right side is the former Soviet Union. The heavy, bold lines in each case are, respectively, Poland and Ukraine. Now, if you look closely, and I don't have to do that, but basically, the first 3 years in Ukraine were virtually no reforms. In fact, Belarus was more reformed until 1994 than was Ukraine in terms of moving towards the market. Now, let me just take a, to the side a little bit, comment. I think it's very important to distinguish between capitalism and the market. Yes, capitalism has been achieved in Ukraine and a lot of countries, but not the market. That's why there's one thing that I disagree with a good friend, Anders Aslan, who has written a lot on the economy of Ukraine, is the title of his book. There's 2 books, How Russia Became a Market Economy and How Ukraine Became a Market Economy. I wish he had replaced the word market in both cases with capitalist, because they have become capitalist, but they're far from competitive market economies in the traditional sense of economic theory. The lag in economic reforms, however, had a lot of other deeper consequences, which are looked at in the second half of my book. First of all, it opened the door to oligarchy. That's what created the rent-seeking environment. Secondly, it generated a poor business climate for abovo business, for small, medium enterprises, which we see to the present day. Third, it began the process of what we now see as pervasive corruption in Ukraine, pervasive and pernicious and persistent. So there's a nice alliteration about corruption here that you can use. Fourth, the delay in reforms, the slow reforms, the poor, weak economy enabled the Moscow blackmail, facilitated it. That Moscow would want to do blackmail, heavens, that's not surprising at all. They had the monopoly of energy. They will use it as much as they can. Allowing them to use it, I think, has to be laid at the feet of Kiev politicians. Fifth, it discouraged the EU from starting the process of bringing Ukraine closer into the EU environment of a democratic and economic sort. On the oligarchy, just want to make one point as to how it really happened. Capitalism had been allowed already by Gorbachev's 1987-88 laws on cooperatives, free enterprise, private enterprise. But there was no real market to control the capitalists. So any criticism of Adam Smith and his invisible hand theory and economists of today who still believe in that, I think has to take in mind that the medicine wasn't being taken. There was no market to control capitalists. And that, of course, allowed rent-seeking. It allows the accumulation of concentrated capital. The bottom line, which this led to in Ukraine, as I discuss in my book, is bottom line, capitalism for the few, low incomes for the many, for the rest. I go beyond the immediate causes, which are controversial, especially amongst political scientists who will naturally disagree with us economists. But I go beyond that and I ask a question which may be closer to the heart of political studies, is why were reforms delayed? Put another way, why did Ukraine and a number of other countries choose to not take the rapid reform approach? I, along with the best-known architect of rapid reforms, Leszek Balcerowicz, absolutely refused to use the term shock therapy. I mean, it's an obviously loaded term. If your paper starts by saying shock therapy was applied, you can pretty well guess what comes in the rest of the paper. Anyway, why were reforms delayed is a more substantive, deeper question and a deeper causation. When I look at that, I first consider what are the official explanations given. What did, for example, the governments of Kravchuk and Fokin and so on in the early years say about why they were not doing what Poland was doing? Well, you had to first build a nation, on which Ruch, by the way, agreed. Well, you had to avoid social pain. The book gives the argument as to why these are, in the end, unconvincing explanation, and why the fundamental reason is that the new leadership of former communists in the Kravchuk government and later governments wanted to become the new capitalist elite. They saw the handwriting on the wall. The old system was gone. There's a new system. We still want to be the elite in the new system. In order to become capitalists, we need time to figure out how to do that and to quietly do the privatization. So the new vested interests that developed, the oligarchs, opposed complete reforms because they're not in their interest. Somebody mentioned Joel Hellman and winners take all, and the notion that the partial reform is in the best interests of the concentrated capitalism. Finally, I just add a couple of last points on this and then the syllogism. Finally, I look at a number of implications of this view of Ukraine, revising conventional history. Kravchuk, Kuchma was the father of the oligarchs. Actually, no. Kuchma was the father of the oligarchs. Lots of evidence for that in my book, if you're not convinced. Kuchma became the nursemaid of the oligarchs. not the father. Other revisions I will maybe go to in some other questions. The bottom line outcome, as I mentioned, capitalism for the few, low income for the many. I leave the last word, the other bookend, to a famous Ukrainian economist. The worst evils which mankind has ever endured were inflicted by bad governments. Ludwig von Mises, born in Lviv/Lemberg, 1881. Thank you.